Hello, everybody. First of all, welcome to my very first public chai chat. Cheers. By the way, you might recall this photo. This is my precious late Lily Bean. And this is the mug that a good friend of mine who's a graphic designer, his name is Shahid Quadri, created for me, unbeknownst to me, with Lily wearing an L as her necklace. And what does the cup say? Plural, which is my word for every sentient being. We are all so much more than meets the eye. If we are going to be labeled, I think the most accurate label for any of us is that each of us, Lily included, is a plural. So, cheers. I was thinking all day today, what a day to launch the Chai Chat, Slow News Day, right? So, we can relax and just sip and bask in each other's light and just enjoy. Oh, and then there's war. Obviously, Putin didn't get the memo that we're meeting tonight. You'd think that, Mr. Troll Farm would check his email every once in a while. Be that as it may, I will want to address what's going on in the world in just a few moments. But first, let's pay homage to what brings us together. Chai. And I promise to let you know that if you're not going to brew your own chai, whether or not you're using my recipe, I'm going to tell you where to get the very best chai. First of all, please cross Starbucks off the list. Okay? Their chai is swill. All right? And that's an insult to swill. You want to get, this is my recommendation, you want to get a brand called Fateel, F-A-T-E-E-L. And it's a Canadian company, but I believe they do sell across the border and possibly even overseas. You'll want to go to Fateel, F-A-T-E-E-L.ca. The only problem is, folks, I checked just before logging on, they're all sold out. However, they do have a contact us page, so bombard them. Let them know that they come highly recommended, and I'll bet they'll get the chai, the Karak Chai Cardamom. I'll bet they'll get it back in stock. Now, if for whatever reason they don't, export or they're out of stock for longer than is convenient to you, the other brand that I would recommend is Quick Tea. And that's with just a K, no C, Quick Tea. And you can get this on Amazon. Only problem with Quick Tea, it's a little sweet, which is why, if at all possible, you do want to brew your own chai. Because obviously you get to regulate, how much sugar you put in. Quick Tea, as well as Fateel, are powders. Now, Fateel, again, slightly less sweet than Quick. But if you are going to be brewing your own tea, I do have one caution. You want to choose a pot that you don't mind really mucking up. Because remember, you're going to be brewing tea within the pot. And tea stains are very hard to get out, right? So when I was brewing my own chai, I used an old pot that I knew I would never use for anything else. It was my special chai pot. So I don't want to ruin your stainless steel. Please take that under advisement. All right, housekeeping. I want to engage with you. I don't want this to be me or Jennifer or Allison, whom I'll introduce more formally in a second, reading me your questions and then me answering them. I really want to be able to hear from you. So here's how I'd like this to work. If you're willing to speak, please do put your question in the chat. Jennifer and Allison will be monitoring the chat, and they will articulate the question to me. But then whoever asked that particular question, actually do one better, put your name. This is Rosalind, this is Cece, this is Bill, and here's my question. That way I can actually call on you, because however I answer, what do I know? You might have a very different point of view. I want to hear it. And if you need clarification or you want to push back on me, awesome. Because the whole point of a chai chat is, in fact, to get as honest as we know how and actually learn from one another, okay? If you don't want to speak, I get it. In that case, please don't put your question in the chat, but you can always tweet me. You can always gram me. I don't go on Facebook anymore. Jen, by the way, has a theory about why I don't. She thinks, and she might be right, that I am thoroughly traumatized by my days of receiving death threats on Facebook, right? Because Facebook was like one of the early, really early social media platforms. I don't get death threats anymore. No worries there. But she might have something. So anyway, Jen goes on Facebook for me. But if at all possible, tweet me, gram me, if you're not going to speak or be ready to speak during this conversation, okay? And I'm happy to engage on social as well. All right, so with that in mind, let me just say something about what's going on in the big bad world out there. And then I'm gonna open it up to questions. You know, I've been reading a lot about Ukraine and Russia, and a lot that challenges my thinking around geopolitics. I'm not interested, to be blunt, in reading that which I already know I'll be sympathetic to. To me, that's boring. So I've been reading stuff on the hard left, and I've been reading stuff on the hard right. And I've taken a lot into account when I suggest to you that precisely because Vladimir Putin is a bully and a thug, I don't think the way to approach his way of being, his modus operandi, I don't think us against them works with someone like him, because he thrives on the oxygen of us against them. In my view, that's precisely what he wants. That way, he can claim to be an even bigger victim of the so-called humiliation at the hands of the West. Now, I want to be clear. We in the West have not been saints. We've provoked. We've been arrogant. That said, Putin is still a thug and a bully. And so I think the way to approach this dilemma, what to do about Putin, is not to seek to defeat him. Defeat is either or. Defeat is us against them. And again, he feasts on that dynamic. I think the better approach is to outwit him. It's to outsmart him. And you know, for the first time in a very long time, I can honestly say that I am impressed with the US government, because this is precisely what the administration has been doing, is outwitting Putin by, for example, releasing otherwise classified intelligence to the world, knowing that the credibility of US intelligence agencies is on the line. Everybody remembers WMDs. So this was a huge risk that the US intelligence community took by strategically, in a drip, drip, drip way, releasing intelligence about the forthcoming invasion of Ukraine. But they were right. And in doing this, they stripped Putin of any credible claim to having a pretext for invasion. In other words, the US intelligence community showed that this invasion has long been premeditated. So nothing Putin can say about what just happened has triggered this invasion. And he fancies himself, you know, the covert CIA agent, right? Or the covert KGB agent. He slinks around as if he's Mr. Mystery. Well, his cover has been blown. Now, that did not stop invasion. I get that. But if Western authorities can continue to think in these terms of outsmarting, outwitting, rather than defeating, they will continue to buy the time to then strengthen the transatlantic alliance, to fortify and intensify the sanctions that are put not just on Putin's cronies, but on the major Russian banks, which in turn will undermine Putin's own credibility with his oligarchs. Speaking of time, there's one other thing I want to add here. Why now? Why now? If this has been premeditated, and it has, what about the timing? Here's what I'm thinking, and it's pure speculation. As you may or may not know, very recently, just before the Winter Olympics, Russia and China touted a brand new pact. And I think it was Putin who said that this will take our relationship to the highest of levels. In essence, we will have each other's backs no matter what. It may be that the reason he's invading now is that he's got a deal with the Chinese government. Namely, we, Russia, will test how far we can go and what the West will do to retaliate. And if we can get away with the invasion of Ukraine, then China, you may very well be able to get away with the annexation, the formal annexation of Taiwan, which we all know is very much something that the Chinese government wants. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you know the old saying, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. That's my take. Feel free to push back. And if you have any questions about this take, I'd like you to put them in the chat, and remember, I'll want you to speak to it. In the meantime, Greg writes, I really worry that this will be a Neville Chamberlain moment when the leaders of the West are not up to the test of this moment, when authoritarianism and tyranny are flexing and hurting innocent people. Greg, I totally hear you. My response to that is that, Iraq and Afghanistan have really chastened me. I used to be a humanitarian interventionist. And I've come to appreciate that sometimes humanitarianism requires staying out rather than going in. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that you don't support the Ukrainian people. Oh, the US and our transatlantic allies and Canada and Australia and New Zealand are very much supporting the Ukrainian people in all sorts of ways, from the provision of, weapons, I'm sorry to say, because who knows in whose hands those weapons will wind up afterwards. Hello, Afghanistan. Hello, Mujahideen. To the sanctions. So it doesn't mean we can't support, but boots on the ground, at least at this point, will actually, I believe, backfire on us. Because here's the thing. During World War II, in that generation, sacrifice still meant something. I'm not convinced it does anymore. So it's a different context. I think the biggest sacrifice that we can expect from the American people today is paying higher gas prices. And even then, that will be seen as cause to defeat President Biden. So that context worries me. There's no point in going in if you're just going to retreat yet again because of a lack of popular support. Okay, let's go to, well, actually, quickly, I want to introduce you. I've mentioned them before, but Jennifer Richmond, please wave, is the coordinator of community for the Moral Courage team. And right next to her on my screen is Allison Gerard. Hello, Allison.
Hello.
And she's our director of education and training. If you take the Moral Courage certification program, you'll be working very closely with both of them, but in the first several weeks, especially with Allison, who will actually be teaching the course. They are both monitoring the chat. And so let me ask Jennifer, am I going to Sean's question next?
Amy's got a question or a statement that goes back to Ukraine. So before we get to Sean, basically, you want me to read it or you've got it up?
Let me read it.
Okay.
So this is Mrs. Chicken Bone Watt. I do agree that it's important to lay bare Putin's technique and approach, both, and it is not stopping him. I believe energy independence and ability to replace what he has to offer are some of the tools needed to counter Russia's moves. Amy, here, 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 here. I think I'm consumed with what now. We're on our way to energy independence, I believe. Maybe not after the next election in the US, but I think we're getting there. So do you, Amy, I want you to speak here. Do you think that there's something by way of energy independence we can be doing now?
Oh, yeah. I feel before Biden was elected, we were well on our way to energy independence, and that's all been reversed. So I kind of have a opposite viewpoint from you of I'm more of a all of the above energy as opposed to cutting out. I don't think we should be buying oil from Russia as we are now. We should be the ones continuing with our pipeline, all of those more on the conservative side of and all of the above energy approach. So I feel that we have weakened our ability to counter Russia by that energy policy, even with the good intent of the unintended consequences are this, is in trying to have a green economy, we've actually lessened our ability to do that because of our dependence on bad actor sources for the oil and gas that is still required to power the world until such time that we can truly have full-on alternative sources. So yeah, I think in my world, we're going away from energy independence, not towards.
Fascinating. So let me ask you about, fossil fuels and coal. I mean, is that part and parcel in your view of what we need to keep using if we are going to get ourselves off of the Russian and, dare I say it, the Saudi
and the Middle
energy
East
sources?
so I'm more of a more graduated and don't decimate the oil and gas industry just when you might need it in order to not be, like grow your own food kind of thing, have everything we need. And I live in California, so very aware of the unintended consequences of a very rapid trying to switch to solar and wind, and actually not having enough power and having rolling brownouts and blackouts and things, because we weren't quite there yet. Again, that's just my, my take.
Well, it's a very unusual take. Thank you for.
Well, it's not unusual on the right, just unusual.
Okay. Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. No, I guess. But I haven't heard it positioned that way. The way I've heard it positioned on the right is we've got to protect, jobs. And I have not, however, heard it articulated as, this for now is a way of focusing on domestic domestic energy sources in order to not be reliant on what happens with bad actors overseas.
Yeah, and to be at choice, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm a coach, and so I'm always all about how do we have the most opportunity, the most choices in front of us.
Right.
Because power can come through that kind of strength, as opposed to just military strength or.
Right. Fascinating. Very good. I appreciate that. Allison, Jennifer, where to next?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of questions on moral courage in general and how to respond to anger from the Reverend. But before we go there, there's another.
Sorry, Bill. We'll call you Bill from now on. All right.
Thank you.
All right. All right.
There's another question from Amy on the trucker convoy, the freedom convoy, and lack of dialogue between the two.
Okay. Are there? So I because Amy's had a chance to engage. Is there somebody else asking about the freedom convoy?
Not yet.
Okay.
But we do.
Let's go to somebody whom we haven't heard from yet.
A couple people came in still talking about energy while I was reading Amy's. Greg Evancio. He asked, as a former geologist in the oil and gas industry, I feel that natural gas can easily replace any fraction of North American energy demand that is currently taken up by coal. We have trillions of cubic feet of it in Canada, where he lives, has abundant supplies. The natural gas will be the transition fuel that gets us to our next energy source.
Okay, yeah. So actually, thank you, Greg, for raising this, because that leads to another question I've pondered. And I think I might have even tried to research this, but maybe 2-3 years ago, and my menopausal brain can't remember what I learned. Why does the US not rely more on Canadian energy sources, or does it? Greg?
It should be, because Canada is right next door and is an abundant supplier of energy. But the problem is that environmental groups have come up and said, oh, they're going to say that the oil sands in northern Alberta, and in the province I live, they're dirty oil. It's environmentally unfriendly, and that's true. But they are spreading it. It's what Jonathan Haidt, a psychologist, I think, called concept creep. It's creeping into all fossil fuels are bad and terrible, and therefore we must get rid of them now. Unfortunately, our entire society is built on fossil fuels. I mean, every piece of medical technology we have today is built on a reliable energy source, and that's fossil fuels. It has to go. I totally agree it has to go, but not today.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
not
but then,
immediately.
okay, not immediately. I want to get to a comment that I saw in the chat from Leanne, who says, I want to move to moral courage topics. I think these are, but have to say, what about First Nations people and the land? So Leanne, tell us more.
Oh, I guess I'm concerned about the pipelines going through and the oil, and yeah, I would like to get away from that as soon as possible, and that we need to make more cultural changes so we use less fossil fuels. And I know that's all difficult, and I don't want to get bogged down in that, but
fair enough.
just wanted to put in a plug for the First Nations people.
Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge your point about, First Nations people. Because again, too often, that perspective is left out of the picture. So thank you for that. Okay. Jennifer, Allison, are there other topics that we can move to?
There are other topics. Again, it was Amy's on dealing with the freedom.
Oh, the Freedom Convoy. Okay.
Mhm.
So what's the question?
All right, let me move back up. It was up here. Amy, if you, sorry, it was up early in here. Okay. She just said she's dying to ask about Justin, the Freedom Convoy, and lack of dialogue between the two. What is your take? She says, I'm an American, but lived in Toronto for many years and have a special place in my heart for Canadian freedom, connection, and happiness.
Yeah, cool. My take. Well, so, I have deep roots in Canada, and so I speak to Canadians all the time. And by the way, right across the country, not just in Ottawa or, on one of the coasts, one of the three coasts. I hear that the media, surprise, have really made a bigger deal of the confrontation than it should have. In other words, yes, obviously this, so-called Freedom Convoy happened, but certainly, clickbait runs amok. And there were stories, for example, of, people in the convoy claiming to be white supremacists, when in reality, it was some Black dude who was joking about being accused of white supremacy. But then, that story sort of ricochets across the internet, white supremacists. And that then becomes a narrative. My point being, and this is one of any number of examples of where not only were the so-called facts misread and misreported, but also that the divide may not be as deep as images of a showdown would suggest. Because remember, right? We don't see the big picture. You can't. The big picture is really big. What we see are those slivers that look confrontational because they are confrontational, but then the mind takes that as what's known in social science as a heuristic. It's a shortcut that applies to now everything about the issue. But that's an illusion. That is a bad habit that the primitive part of our brain is in. And we have to remember that no matter what we are seeing in terms of media stories, we will always, no matter who's doing the reporting, will get a lopsided picture. So my conversations with Canadians in various parts of the country have given me, I think, a more nuanced understanding. By and large, Canadians were okay with the protests. It's important to hold government accountable. They made their point, the Freedom Convoy. Freedom of expression is not the same thing as having to agree. And Canadians, for the most part, are glad that this is still a country in which you can protest and then move on. Pretty reasonable. Who disagrees with me that that's the bigger picture? You can even speak up. You don't have to put anything in the chat right now.
Just, Irshad, if you could speak though to the moving on, the Emergency Powers Act and the actual shutting down bank accounts and coming after 200 people. That's the part I was asking, why didn't the government enter into like a moral courage kind of dialogue? And why?
Very good.
Why is that happening?
Very good, very good. Truth is, I don't know. I don't know why that's happening, Amy. You know, Prime Minister Trudeau is not a particularly morally courageous guy. He talks a good game about dialogue and negotiation. But even when it comes to First Nations, he's been a huge disappointment. So I never really expected that much from him. I think he knows that his popularity is low, and he did something very late in the process that I think he felt the pressure to do, and probably overextended, probably overreached, because he waited too long to actually show leadership. That's my take. I can tell you from my conversations with the various Canadians I've been in touch with, they're not particularly disturbed by the invocation of the emergency powers. It's happened before in Canada, and Canada has a constitution, a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that actually begins with what's called a notwithstanding clause, which is a way of giving governments the ability to suspend certain civil liberties in exceptional cases. So that clause actually looms large in, you know, what is acceptable in Canadian politics. It's not used very often. And absolutely, you can take the government to court over it. And yes, the Trudeau government is being taken to court over it. But really nobody whom I've spoken with is particularly pissed off that it's been invoked. And some have actually said it's high time. Okay. Moving on to a new question.
Yep, Jen, am I up with the next one? Jen, my friend. Okay, well, that's the message I got. So I'm okay. You're like, are you muted? This is from Bill Green, and Leanne seconded it. Is that a word? Seconded it? Anyway, she gave it.
She upvoted it.
She gave it a thumbs up. Yes, yeah. And I too was very happy to read this question.
Okay.
I want to know the answer. After close listening amid serious disagreement, is there room for clearly expressed anger? Or does one just say something like, I don't think our conversation is going anywhere, and excuse oneself from further talk?
Look, anger is a deeply human emotion. If I said that there's no room for anger, I'm asking you not to be human. And, not only is that unfair, it's ineffective. You're going to be human, damn it. So, yeah, like it or not, anger, is part of what makes us us as a species. With all that said, though, what we have to ask ourselves every once in a while is, what does it mean that this conversation is not going anywhere? No, really, what does that mean? Does it mean I'm not changing your mind, so I'm done? Because if you're in it to change the other person's mind, then you're going to treat them like an object. Martin Buber, and I know Bill knows this very well. He is a connoisseur of theology and religious studies. Martin Buber, a titanic theologian of the 20th century, pointed out that there's a distinction between the I-thou relationship and the I-it relationship. In an I-it relationship, you are an obstacle. It is taking up space. It is sucking up oxygen. It needs to be out of the way. In an I-thou relationship, thou, meaning you, are as multifaceted as I am. So this disagreement that we're having, it's a legitimate disagreement. But you are so much more than just this disagreement. You're so much more than the issue that we are disagreeing about. You are a plural, just like I am. And so, yes, again, anger has its place. At the same time, to leave a conversation, which is entirely your right, with this attitude that this isn't going anywhere, is to foreclose on the other person's many other sides. Because what you don't know is where you do see eye to eye. You don't know that yet, because you haven't explored that. So when I have my wits about me, which is not all the time, but when I do, I like to leave things with we haven't found out yet what we can work with. And I'm not in the best emotional place to continue that exploration. But when I am, I hope that you'll be open to me picking it back up with you, and vice versa. Let's pick it up where we left off.
Yeah, I just, I'm sure with you. I just want to make sure that in going that way, you just suggested that I'm not being disingenuous, or that do I really mean that, or is that just sort of a sweet way of mellowing out the actual anger? Having said that, I'll just say one other thing that's actually a response to my own question. And now I'm worried that I'm going to sound too sweet. I've had a long time relationship with somebody Irshad knows very well, and I do too, Dick Pogue, very conservative Republican. I tend to be liberal progressive. There are points of view he has that are extraordinarily angry. We, because we're friends, we can go back and forth, but sometimes I just sort of reach a boiling point. But I have found this, I worry, is too sweet. but it does seem to work for me and for him.
Mhm.
And that is simply to say, rather than act angry and get all heated up about, I say, Dick, that really makes me angry. I'm going to have to think more about that, or maybe we can talk later.
Mhm.
Where I just report that I'm angry as opposed to acting it out. Now, I felt defensive sharing this because, you know, I just sort of think being a nice guy, liberal, progressive, Christian, all those nice things, that I just don't, I would rather be good than just nice. And
Yes.
emotional honesty is a big thing with me, that every time I have any dealings with Irshad, wow, I am brought to that core feeling, that emotional honesty. If it doesn't always mean transparency, at least it means making sure I'm not being passive aggressive or disingenuous.
You know, Bill, I think the way you handle it is brilliant. You're honest about, you know, your emotions. Here's the thing, though. Very few people are as aware of their emotions as you are. And so, like, one of the things I try to teach is that while there is a time and a place for debate, and nobody likes a good debate more than I do, my friend, not every time and not every place is right for debate. And so often today, we turn what can be perfectly healthy discussions into debates. And the problem with debates is there can only ever be one winner. And your ego is going to whisper, Bill, I'm not going to let you lose. And my ego is going to whisper, Irshad, crush him. And so any hope of actually listening goes out the window, right? So a question I think that's worth asking in any given situation where you feel passionate is, why does this need to be a debate? If you find that that's what it's becoming, why? And you can literally interrupt that dynamic by asking that question. If you're here to understand and not to win, then there's no need to win. How simple is that? Moreover, understanding where the other is coming from is a form of winning. You know why? Because when you give a fair hearing, the other is much more likely to reciprocate. So if you want to be heard, you've got to go first in the listening department.
The only thing I'd add to that, which I've heard you talk about before, is the importance of intuiting or understanding somebody's backstory.
Absolutely.
In other words, what is it about Dick's background that makes him, you know, so ornery on this point that I really think is important?
Yes.
But then I stopped. Oh my gosh, I remember if I'd grown up the way he did, I'd be just like him.
And to not be afraid to ask questions, sincere questions. Yeah, not sarcastic ones, sincere ones. Like, you know, Dick, have you had any personal experiences that have profoundly shaped your thinking about this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when he says, yeah, and he explains, there's always more than just that explanation.
Yes.
So to ask, tell me more, right?
Yes.
That 3-word phrase is unbelievable at cracking open vulnerability. Tell me more. It's unassuming, it's utterly inviting, and it telegraphs that you still have the floor, I'm still listening, therefore you can still trust me. I'm not playing gotcha.
Thank you.
By the way, I speak not from a place of theory, but from a place of real experience and recent experience. you know, Jennifer, Allison, and I, we have it out sometimes.
Y'all, we have it out sometimes.
And what I have said to them both is, it's not the conflict that matters, it's what we do afterwards, right? Do we hold grudges, or do we work through the raw emotion and then come back to each other to clear the air? So I'm not afraid of conflict. And I don't think any one of us should be, if we recognize that there's always something to be learned from it. And then we come back with those lessons and share them with one another. That actually, I believe, makes a team stronger.
We've got a couple other related to moral courage that I want to get to, some people we haven't heard from. So we have one from Sean, who's a fan of Don't Label Me, and says, when people engage with me on difficult subjects like God or social justice, I like to begin by asking, I've learned this word means different things to different people. What does it mean to you? What are your thoughts on this approach?
So is the question, what does social justice mean to me?
No, what I mean is, a lot of times people will jump into discussions without first saying, what do you mean by God? Or what do you mean by social justice? You know, and
Right.
but it's also important to phrase that question in a way that sounds warm and inviting too.
So Sean, how do you do that? How do you handle that on your end?
Well, I've found it to be really powerful. So like, for example, one phrase people use a lot is critical race theory. And so when I talk with people about that, some people just mean teaching Black history, and that's all they mean by it.
Right.
Other people mean intersectional identity theory. Other people mean a legal theory from the 80s. And so and it's used for all these different things.
Yeah.
And I found it to be so helpful. If someone's like annoyed and they use that phrase, I need to ask them what they mean by that phrase. What are they really wanting, and what are they getting at?
No, I think that's fantastic. That's exactly right. And by the way, with Jennifer and Allison, and they will attest to this, I ask a lot of questions. And sometimes those questions are, as specific, yet as simple as, wait, what do you mean by it? What is it? Or hold on, you said this. I'm not sure I get what this is, right? Because here's the thing. I don't want to talk at cross purposes. That leads to a lot of misunderstanding. So I'm not always the best, to say the obvious, about being gentle when I ask, what do you mean by it? Or what is this? But if you can let the person you're interacting with know, it's because I want to understand. I don't want to misunderstand that I'm asking you, can you just clarify for me what you mean by it?
I'm not trying to trap you. I want to make sure we're
Exactly.
talking about the same thing is all. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And when you do that, you're providing context for your own motivation for asking, right?
Yes.
So all of these things really matter, to, here's the big word, trust. Building trust. And we have a precious paucity of social trust today. So if in your own interactions, you can get into the habit of providing context, of explaining why you're even asking a question, that is part of lowering emotional defenses. So that there's more, frankly, openness and willingness to be vulnerable with one another whenever that vulnerability is necessary.
Really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
you.
Thank you, Sean. And you, Sean.
Of course, Bill. I think I saw a question from Zach Cresswell. Is Zach still in the house?
Here, what's up?
What's up, Zach? I think you asked me about my media diet. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just curious as to how you kind of like make sense of what's going on in the world. Do you like I've subscribed to several Substacks lately, and I've found that 3 newsletters a day is more than I can stay on
Right.
top of. They're all really interesting, and then I hear about more interesting one. Then I try to I'm just curious as to how you kind of manage figuring out what the heck is going on.
Okay, so first things first, I mentioned, right? I don't like reading, watching, or listening to stuff that I already think I'm going to agree with. To me, that's a waste of time. It's boring as stink. And if I'm not learning something, I don't feel like I'm living. So I seek out not stuff that I think I'm going to vehemently disagree with, although I don't mind hearing that, but I seek out sources of information and commentary that do a good job of reconciling seeming opposites. And I want to recommend to you all 2 podcasts that I just adore. One of them is produced by the Center for Humane Technology, and it's called Your Undivided Attention. And I have learned so much through this podcast, not just about technology, but about culture, about metacognition, by which I mean, how do we know what we know? How are we thinking about the way we're thinking? And I assure you, this is not intellectual masturbation. It really isn't. The 2 hosts have amazing guests on, and they tackle real world issues. If you take the time to listen to Your Undivided Attention, and it will require undivided attention, I predict you will be blown away. That's one podcast. Another is a podcast I've been on. It's called Hidden Forces. And the host, Dimitri Kofinas, positions it as a podcast for, investors and entrepreneurs. But then he has a third audience, and he always mentions this, and people who want to question consensus narratives. More often than not, this podcast also takes me deeper into current affairs in a way that actually makes me feel giddy about learning what I'm learning. His guests, present company excluded, are that good. Now, not every podcast or every episode that drops in either one of these will knock your socks off. Of course not. Again, you're an individual. You have your own priorities, your own, passions, your own bugaboos. But if you subscribe to these, and they're free, I think you'll find more often than not, you'll be glad you did. So, Zach, I deliberately don't subscribe to Substacks because I know I don't have time to keep up with all of that reading. When I read, it's because I am so impelled to find something out that nothing's going to stop me. But if I'm fed something regularly, I'm not going to keep up with it. Why then do I keep up with podcasts? At least these two? Because I love falling asleep to the sound of those voices. Not those particular voices, but I love nothing more. This is what a nerd I am. I love nothing more than packing it in for the night and hitting start on an episode that I'm actually excited about, and then falling asleep to it, knowing that the next morning I'll still have that, podcast episode screen up, and it'll be a good reminder that I have to start it all over again. Because damn if I can remember what I learned last night.
That's really
But
interesting.
that's how I listen. That's how I listen.
Yeah. Do you how much time do you spend paying attention to the news? Like I remember reading or listening to a Freakonomics episode, I think it was, they were talking about how watching the news or reading the news, because most of the time you can't do anything about it anyway.
Right.
But then I also find myself wanting to know what's going on. And
Sure.
so how do you, you must listen to more than just 2 podcasts to find out, what's going on in the world,
I mean, sure, Zach, I graze, right?
Yeah, okay.
I'll hop from one podcast to another. I have some other favorites. It just so happens that the 2 I've mentioned are so thoroughly intellectually stimulating that I wanted to bring them to everybody's attention.
Sure.
But yeah, for sure. Every morning I'll log on to the New York Times. But here's the thing. I'll scroll and I will, click on a headline, but I'll save it to my drafts. Because if I need a break from work, I'll then go and read one of these stories and then I'll get back to work. It's almost like a treat for me, but it's not an obsession.
That makes sense.
One other quick thing I'll let you all know. Over the pandemic, obviously, most of us have been shut in, at least for a certain period of time. And that includes my mother, who's now 77 years old. And I have taught her over the last couple of years a lesson that I'm really, really glad she is learning, which is that everybody has an agenda. Everybody. Al Jazeera has an agenda, Mom. CBC has an agenda. Many agendas, actually. The private channels have agendas. And she's all about TV, right? That's how she gets her news, which is fine. But what she has learned to do is realize that just because she hears X doesn't mean that's all there is to the story. And these days, when she is afraid, for example, one of Canada's main politicians stood up in Parliament after the horrible running down and killing of a Muslim family in London, Ontario. This was about 8 or 9 months ago. One of Canada's main politicians got up in Parliament and said, Muslims are not safe in this country. My mom couldn't bring herself to go to the grocery store that day because he said Muslims are not safe in this country. And I said, Ma, I need you to remember, everybody's got an agenda. And when you act from a place of fear, you are letting other people's agendas define your life. Look at all of the Muslims out there in Canada who haven't been run down today. I'm not saying, Mom, that it's okay that a Muslim family got run down. Not at all. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen to you or to my sister. Go live your life because everyone has an agenda. And more often than not, she now remembers this. And I think that's a huge lesson for any of us to take to heart. I hope it doesn't instill cynicism, because that's not my intention. Well, it is 5 past the hour, and I want to give any last burning questions an opportunity to be voiced. And then I have a final thought to offer.
I guess I'll just ask a sort of general, what do you think is, the best thing that just the average, average person can do to promote moral courage?
Well, thank you, Eric. And thank you for your support on social media. It really means a lot to me. Let's first, back to, I think, was it Sean? Let's first define moral courage. Popular culture defines it as speak truth to power. But that suggests that power is always out there, that you have no power, and that's why you need to speak truth to it. Moreover, it also suggests that your truth is the truth. Therefore, how can any other truths be worth considering? That's an overly simplistic definition. The way we define moral courage at the Moral Courage Project is a little bit more nuanced. We say that moral courage means speak truth to the power of your own ego, even as you are speaking truth to powers out there. Why? Because the ego, if it is unacknowledged, actually becomes the most pernicious, most pervasive power there is. It has the power to make us all feel more afraid, more stressed, more threatened by points of view that challenge our own. And why does the ego do this? Because it exists to keep us alive. So it's protecting us like an overprotective parent. It means well, but also like that overprotective parent, it stops us from taking reasonable risks in order to grow. So what you can do to promote moral courage is, first of all, role model it.
First of all, what? I'm sorry?
Role model it.
Oh.
Role model it by proactively hearing out people who passionately disagree with you on something that you are passionate about. And to let them know that you care about where they're coming from. And so to ask sincere questions, not sarcastic ones. And if they don't reciprocate your fair hearing with their own, the next best thing you can do is not get triggered by that. But instead, to let them know that when they're ready to give you the fair hearing that you have provided to them, you'll be here. And we can pick it up where we left off. You know what makes people think? Not intelligence, surprise. When they get something that they weren't expecting, and in an us against them culture, which is where we are today, an us against them culture, it is so easy to become defensive and more dogmatic than we even mean to be. That's not a surprise, right? People troll on social media. They show up just to blow up the space. That's what they're there for. And guess what? A lot of us fall for it. That'll never get them thinking about your perspective. Surprise is what gets people thinking. And that's why, if you can role model not becoming defensive and overly dogmatic, they may never come back to you to say, wow, you really set an example for me. Sometimes they will, most of the time they won't. But make no mistake, you'll get them thinking. And sometimes that's an even bigger win than a slam dunk, because a slam dunk plants the seeds of resentment and grievance and feelings of humiliation, and it'll come back to bite you. But getting people thinking, that's the ultimate. Which brings me to my final thought of the night. You know, in the blurb for tonight's chat, one of the things I wrote was that we'll talk about, you know, whether the world really would be better off going to the dogs, literally. Now, you know, I'm a fan, right? Of our pooch pals, big fan. But that's not why I think the world might be better off going to the dogs. The real reason is because of a fairly recent book called Survival of the Friendliest by a cognitive neuroscientist named Brian Hare, H-A-R-E, and his researcher wife, Vanessa Hare. And they both teach at Duke University in North Carolina. Survival of the Friendliest as a phrase is, of course, a play on survival of the fittest. And in this book, they are arguing that for 200,000 years, our species has existed. And we've actually shared the planet with 4 other types of humans. But all of those other humans have gone extinct. And so far, we've endured. And why is that? And they posit it's because we are the friendliest species. Not because we are the fittest in the sense of the most aggressive, the most clever, or the most strong. That's not what they mean by the fittest. They mean that we have shown the most capacity for cooperation with one another, and therefore for innovation, because innovation requires teamwork. Now, what does this have to do with dogs? Well, it turns out that Brian and Vanessa Hare run the Duke Puppy Lab, where they actually raise puppies and study them. And in their vast research, they have found that the reason dogs get along so well with humans is that, like humans, dogs, as we now call them, self-domesticated. They domesticated themselves to be friendly. And in that way, they got what they wanted. They got companionship, they got care, they got food. As a matter of fact, when the dog licks your face, I hate to break it to you, but it's not necessarily because they love you. It's at least as much because they're looking for crumbs around your mouth. And from time to time, I don't want to gross anybody out, I'm just keeping it real, even little bits of vomit, okay? Because that is food. The point is that dogs became friendly so that we would take them in. What a partnership. What a glorious relationship we human beings have with canines. And that's the point that this book makes, is that today, frankly, we could take a lot more lessons from our doggy roommates. They've remained friendlier than friendly. We, on the other hand, can be pretty damn vicious. So in that sense, I sure wouldn't mind if the world went to the dogs. And on that note, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Please come back for the second chai chat, whenever that will be. And by the way, if you do have other questions for me, remember, you can reach me, on social media. Also, if you are intrigued at all by some of the moral courage tools that were on offer tonight, thanks to your questions, check out moralcourage.org, where we have a program that actually certifies individuals to become professional moral courage mentors, and certified not by me, not even by the Moral Courage Project, but by none other than Oxford University, our academic partner. I'll look forward to engaging with you again. Be well. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Aha.